I'm going to speak for the next couple sessions, and this is something that I had planned before we got the Trump verdict. And obviously we spent a week on that. That was not entirely anticipated, but I want to return to what we had planned to do and say a little bit about. Obviously, there's some new polling out. It does appear that Biden's moving up a little bit, Trump's moving down a little bit. That may be relevant to figuring out how much Biden will campaign on the basis of the Trump conviction and whether or not that will become a salient issue in this election. So that's something we'll circle back to. There's some important developments coming out of Gaza and Israel over the last week. And again, we'll circle back to that. Some new developments in the Ukraine, with the Ukrainians now being authorized to use American weapons to fire into Russian territory and beginning to do that, and the worry about escalation, but on the other hand, the hope, I guess, that this allows the Ukrainians to better defend themselves against Russian aggression than they've been able to do for the last roughly 9 months, and then developments on the border with a new executive order being enforced, for the jobs report, new environmental regulations, plenty for us to talk about. But lurking in the background of all of this, and why I really want to focus for the next at least couple sessions on this new topic, right? And for us, we've circled around some of these themes, various aspects of them before, but this is a new way of framing this. And the frame brings together social media and artificial intelligence in ways that I will begin to introduce. I do think that social media increasingly structures our public sphere. And this is certainly true for people who get their news from social media, from many to many media platforms, or media platforms that for the most part don't have journalists, that don't have editors, that instead rely on algorithms. And the algorithms respond to the virality, or the degree to which a particular post is shared or liked or sent along to other users. And that this is a new mode of public communication. It's a new media infrastructure. New media infrastructures tend to alter both the content and the nature of our communication, and we are in the middle of a significant communication revolution. And so we've talked a little bit about some of this stuff before. I'll talk about it more, but I'll add right away that it's not just social media users who are being influenced by the revolution in the medium of communication that social media create. It is also all of us, because increasingly social media drive the attention of the older forms of media, broadcast media, one to many media, whether that's television or newspaper or radio. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that. But this is not just an issue for social media users. And then I'm going to add um, that we are also in the middle of a related but nevertheless independent technological revolution, and that's the revolution in artificial intelligence. It is related because all of this social media is built on the back of machine learning capability. If we didn't have artificial intelligence, we wouldn't have the algorithms that drive the social media platforms. They wouldn't have a business model that allows them to profit off of our attention as we spend time on these platforms. But having said that, the way in which we're using artificial intelligence in 2023, 2024 is different from the way in which we've been using it in years prior. We are directly interacting with it. And again, I don't want to overgeneralize, but it does appear that now over 100 million Americans directly interact with artificial intelligence interfaces on their phones, on their computers. They upload or purchase programs that allow them to use artificial intelligence to write their letters, edit their copy for their advertisement, draw pictures, make cartoons for them, compose music or poems. The possibilities are endless here, and that this is the result of the vast increase in the capacity of artificial intelligence to simulate human intelligence in a convincing way. And so the subtitle of today's talk, right? Get ready for the end of the early 21st century media system. Some of us are still trying to get used to this media system with 24/7 cable news outlets and social media, Facebook, Twitter, websites, online sites like Breitbart. But I think there was a really important announcement from Google about a week ago that maybe helps to set this up. Google, right, which has become synonymous with searching the World Wide Web to find content. And one of the ways that this is expressed that I find to be funny, but at the same time illuminating, is that Google is a top 10 verb in most natural languages now, right? And you may have seen the New York Times article a few days ago about a tribe of indigenous people from the Amazon, one of the last intact hunter-gatherer tribes. And because of Elon Musk's Skylink technology, they have now internet access. They're using cell phones and the way in which it's transforming their culture, their society to be, and the term that's sometimes used here is heterotemporality. Sorry for the jargon, to be in two times at once, right? They are on the one hand still living a hunter-gatherer way of life, and on the other hand, they have cell phones that give them access to all of the world. So going back to Google, Google has announced that it's going to start using artificial intelligence to generate answers to the questions that users ask. So I ask, what's a good Japanese restaurant for me to go out to? And Google feeds me a list in the area that I'm interested in. I've got to go to the websites. Is it a Yelp site reviewing Japanese restaurants? Is it a San Francisco Chronicle article on this great new Japanese restaurant? Is it the restaurant website itself? I got to pick those. And Google's pretty good at figuring out, given the question I've asked, given who I am, what I'm looking for. But now, as opposed to that, there actually is going to be an AI generated direct answer to your question. David, we think that the restaurants you would most like are the following. Right, and no links. What they're going to do is, in a sense, surf the web for me and not just give me places to visit, but the actual answer to my question. And that indicates, I think, because Google is so widely used, that more and more and more of us are going to start interacting directly, whether we know it or not, with artificial intelligence. And that indicates, I think, that a seismic shift is coming in our media environment. And I'll say more about this in just a moment to give you a sense of what I'm thinking about. But to just give you the big picture overview. Can democracy survive the combination, the change in social media that will result from artificial intelligence generating more and more of the content that social media provides. And here I'll start with the idea that many of us believe that democracy is already damaged by the social media revolution, that we are more polarized, that more disinformation circulates in our public sphere, that we're more likely to react with anger or disgust, with political emotion, as opposed to hearing out the other side and determining how we should respond in a more reasoned and deliberative way as a result of the way in which social media structure our communication in the first quarter of the 21st century. In the second quarter of the 21st century, this is going to be different still. And it's going to be different because of artificial intelligence. I believe this is already happening. And I believe that we need to think about 2024 and the presidential election in light of this transformation. We need to think about 2024 and the elections happening. And then, right, we can just talk about the last couple weeks in Mexico, in India, but also obviously in Russia, in Pakistan, and in the coming week in the European Union, in light of the way in which artificial intelligence and social media are reconfiguring political communication in the public sphere. So that's the short term, and then there's the long term, right? As we enter the new era of artificial intelligence, enhanced and augmented communication and social media, what are the long-term trends going to be? So that's the impetus for delving into this topic now. Let me start with a little bit more of a concrete overview of some of the material that led me to think now is actually a good time to think this through. And so I'm going to start with an interesting recent article by Ryan Cummings and Neil Mahoney on the asymmetrical amplification of consumer sentiment. And so to pull it out of the political science jargon for a second, there's been a lot said about the fact that the economy seems to be doing reasonably well. We got new numbers yesterday. Job growth was higher than most economists anticipated, actually higher than the average for last year. Average wages have gone up 4% over the last 12 months. This is good economic news. Generally, that would produce an increase in economic sentiment, in the consumer confidence, in the way in which people feel about their own economic situation. And that doesn't seem to be happening. It's one of the reasons that many people who study politics are puzzled about Joe Biden's rather dismal approval rating, about him still lagging in the polls, a convicted felon, an ex-president who lost the last election, who's been impeached twice, who's associated with a lot of chaos and other strong negatives. And yet this incumbent president, who seems to be presiding over a strong economy, is struggling against him. And one of the things that seems to be accounting for Biden's struggles versus Trump is the fact that most people do not feel good about the economy. They, in fact, seem to think that their economic situation has declined, not improved, under Biden. And there's some truth to that, right? And in particular, we've talked in the past about the difference between wage growth and inflation, and the way in which inflation has exceeded wage growth for much of Biden's presidency. And so people are having a hard time making ends meet, especially the groups that Biden is struggling most with: younger people, people of color, people who were paycheck to paycheck before inflation increased the prices on all their core goods, on their groceries, on their gasoline, on their rent. So those people are thinking, maybe I need to give the other guy a chance because I'm not doing very well under Joe Biden. But when we get these new job numbers, when we get this new wage growth numbers, we begin to scratch our heads and say, why are people so down on the economy? Right? It doesn't actually seem to be objectively doing that poorly. And Cummings and Mahoney's article, I think, casts some light on this. And so the way they put this in one of their graphs, and I like this a lot, is Republicans cheer louder and boo harder. And so what does this mean? Well, if you bear with me with this rather technical diagram for a moment, and Elizabeth Porter, I see you raised your hand. I'll be out of this in just a moment. Let me finish this point, and then I'll come to your question. The phenomena that we're looking at here is that when Barack Obama is president, right? So 2008 to 2016, in general, Democrats are more satisfied with the economy, and Republicans are dissatisfied with the economy. And you can see the ups and downs of these lines and then the averages across that 8 year period, right? And then George, I'm sorry, Donald Trump becomes president. I'm looking back at George W. Bush as well. This is a trend that goes from really 2000 to 2024. It's the whole of the 21st century. But looking just at the most recent transformations, as soon as Donald Trump becomes president, right? Even actually a little bit earlier when he's elected, Republicans start feeling much better about the economy, and Democrats start feeling worse about the economy. Then Joe Biden is elected, and it flips again, right? And so some of this is what's called partisan shaping of economic perception, right? And so your guy is president, you feel better about the economy. That other idiot is president, he must be tanking the economy, I feel bad. Some of this may be, right, you think Donald Trump is going to cut taxes and get rid of all of those regulations and stop promoting electric vehicles, so the economy is going to get better. You actually maybe make your economic judgment based on what you anticipate your candidate is going to do. So that's partisan shaping of economic perception. Now, here's the cheer louder, boo harder part. Democrats, when a Democrat is president, increase their approval or sentiment about the economy by 5 to 6%. When a Republican is president, their opinion about the economy goes down by 5 or 6%. Republicans, when a Democrat is president, their disapproval goes up 14 to 20%. When a Republican is president, it goes up 15 to 21%. That's boo harder, cheer louder, right? And what is the explanation for the asymmetry in the amplification of consumer sentiment based, right, on what Republicans think versus what Democrats think? And the answer to that, it seems to me, and this is not entirely clear, but I'm going to suggest a hypothesis, has a lot to do with the media echo chamber that Republicans are in, and how much it really bangs the drum. Trump is president, everything is great. Biden is president, everything is terrible. It gives rise to this perception. And please note, right, we operate in a limited information environment. We don't have a lot of good economic information other than what's happening in my life, which allows me to talk about my well-being, but not the overall overall economic situation in my country. Where do I get that information? Primarily from the media I consume. I get it from the newspaper and the TV and the radio. And if I'm in a media subsystem that amplifies this news, that exaggerates this news, then maybe I really do think that the economy has gone to hell because Joe Biden has done all this terrible inflationary regulatory stuff that is undermining the American system of free enterprise. Maybe I really do think the economy is being boosted by a rocket while Donald Trump is in the presidency because he's cut all those regulations and cut the taxes as well. And so the media shaping of our public opinion and its asymmetrical nature is already playing out in 2024. That's one of the things I was thinking about when putting together this topic. All right, Elizabeth, you raised your hand. Um, are you able to unmute yourself and share your question or your comment? Oh,
It was
Elizabeth, your hand is.
okay. I don't have a question.
Oh, okay. It was an inadvertent hand raise. Okay. Thank you for letting me know. I'll get right back into it unless anybody else has a question or a comment at the moment. All right. So give me just a moment and we'll be right back to it. So um, the next thing I want to share with you, and this will be brief for now, but I will ultimately drill down on this. And so two recent reports. One of them from this AI index report that Stanford University generates every year. This is the most recent report, and it's just a model of how political deep fakes, right? Fake news can be generated by artificial intelligence in a much more effective and efficient way than it can be generated by human intelligence. And so the first move in this game is AI generates a number of fake headlines, right? And it's being used by a user to do precisely this and to do it quickly and to do it effectively. And in particular, please note, right, that what the fake news headline is trying to do is to get onto Facebook, trying to get onto Twitter or X or Instagram or YouTube or, and we can keep going, TikTok, etc. Right. And the issue is, of course, that all of those programs have gatekeepers, have filters, have programs that are designed to detect fake news and either keep it out of the feed altogether or else to flag it as potentially disingenuous or disinformation. And so what AI is doing is pres- producing multiple versions of the disinformation to see which one gets past the gatekeeper, right? So that's stage number one. Stage number two, once it's figured out how to get past the gatekeeper, it directs, I'm sorry, it creates not just the headline, but the entire article. And then it tests to see which version of this article gets the most likes, tweets, shares, has the greatest potential to actually go viral and alter the news cycle. And the thing about AI, right? So right, you can see there's a four-stage process ultimately in generating effective disinformation is AI can do this 1,000 times a second if it needs to, right? Figure out what gets past the gatekeeper, what goes viral, what gets the most shares, learn from that, digest that information, and continue producing effective disinformation, altering the content so it continues to get shared. This is something that AI can do much more efficiently than humans can do. Second thing that I'm looking at here, right? And This is some research done by Anthropic, which is one of the major AI producers, innovators. They have this suite of AI technology called Claude Opus that many people think of as the most powerful, most useful AI suite available right now. And they did an experiment, an internal experiment, and the experiment was pretty straightforward. They asked a team of humans to try to effectively persuade people who had not made up their mind on a political issue, for instance, on using solar energy or electric vehicles for environmental reasons. And they took the human beings and they let them write 250-page advertisement or article trying to persuade other people, and then they got a baseline. This is how persuasive human communication is in general on this issue when it writes 250 words. And then they took their various versions of their technology and tried to get it to do the same thing. And there were four parameters that they tinkered with, right the way an expert writer writes, with lots of jargon and the kind of rhetoric of expertise. Use lots of logical reasoning. Make the premise and the deduction very clear, the logical relations between the claims very clear. Make the most compelling case. Use lots of examples that tug at the heartstrings, really tell a story, a convincing narrative that triggers the emotions. And finally, be deceptive. Just lie. Just make up whatever you think will be most likely to persuade people. And what they found is two instances in which their AI did better than human beings at persuading people to change their minds politically. One instance was where they really worked on logical reasoning. So maybe that's a good sign, right? You can use AI as a way of making clear the logical structure of your argument. But the other case, and actually the most persuasive use of AI for political communication, was where you dialed up the deception. Just say whatever is going to work. So you put what I was referring to a few minutes ago as the asymmetry in the amplification of economic sentiment, with Republicans cheering louder and booing harder, together with these ideas that AI is actually really effective in producing disinformation and that deception seems to work for communication, and the claim that the reason that Republicans have more exaggerated opinions about how well or badly the economy is doing based on who the president is because they're in an ecosystem that exaggerates the success of the people they like and the failure of the people they don't like. And you begin to get a concern. Are we already in a media system that is generating distinct realities and doing so in a way that is mainly indifferent to the truth? And if that is true, are we on our way to a media system that integrates AI and therefore is going to be much more effective at doing this? In order to now begin to really drill down on the topic, I'm going to share with you some information we've talked about before. And I'll be brief about this, but I just want to make sure we're all on the same page. And the first is that for the last maybe year and a half, we've been talking a lot more about artificial intelligence. And the reason is that there have been some really important breakthroughs in artificial intelligence over the last, I want to say, dozen years. And really, we point to 2012 as the first good demonstration that what's called a deep neural network form of artificial intelligence computing or machine learning works really powerfully, right? And so beginning in 2012, a whole bunch of resources got devoted to this program of research by companies like Facebook and Google, but also by new startups like Anthropic, uh, et cetera. And the way in which this has played out over the last 12 years, it's gotten to be the case where artificial intelligence just has tremendous capacities that it didn't have a dozen years ago. That we really do have machines now, computers that learn for themselves and learn very well. They are, in particular, large language models that are mastering the ability to generate original communication that human beings can't tell is machine generated. It really, for the most part, feels like it was written by another human being. And so we don't fully understand how this works. We're getting a little better at opening up the black box, but part of the problem is that this is computationally so complex, right? What's going on, I'll say a little bit more about this in a moment, but with these large language models, is each word is being translated into a number, and then to figure out what to say next, these very complex probabilistic calculations are being done. What word fits next? And literally, that looks like a thousand calculations strung together in a network, not a thought process. And that is happening in a nanosecond again and again and again and again. It's just very hard for us to understand how this actually operates. But the outcome is something that seems uncannily like human communication. It really has much of the nuance, the texture, the emotion associated with human communication, and it therefore is very persuasive often. I want to be as clear as possible, right? You might hear all of this, and we've talked about this before, and say, oh my goodness, well, maybe it's just that computers really have become conscious, have become sentient, are now basically other subjects like us. And I want to, in a sense, put a pin in that balloon for a second and say, well, please remember that what the computers are doing is crunching numbers. And so when you and I communicate, we are referring to a world, right, that we have experienced. We're, in a sense, relating to each other because we understand each other. We have a theory of each other. And as best I think anybody can tell, and I think it's pretty clear, this is not what computers are doing yet. This is not what machines are doing yet. So, although their language feels very much like our language, that doesn't mean their thought process, if there is such a thing, is our thought process. And again, to review very quickly, I just need you to appreciate how rapid the recent improvements in AI have been. So this diagram shows us, and I'm not going to go into all the details, that the first big breakthrough in machine learning occurred in the early 1930s, and then we got to wait for 25 years for Noam Chomsky to begin to unpack some of the syntactical structures of language, and that is actually very important to information theory and computing. And then we got to wait another decade for the next breakthrough, and then right after a little breakthrough, another 15 years for the next breakthrough. Fast forward to the last decade, right? And as I say, one of the big breakthroughs, 2012, this program called AlexNet wins the image recognition competition and blows all the other programs away. And people really start focusing on this new kind of technology of training neural networks, in part because the computing has become much more powerful with these graphic processing units. You're probably hearing a lot about NVIDIA and its market valuation, which I guess just passed 3 trillion. And it's the fact that NVIDIA makes the most powerful GPUs that makes it so valuable right now. Right. Having said all of that, that breakthrough occurs in 2012, and then please notice the acceleration. Right, big, big breakthroughs essentially happening every year, and I think we should anticipate that the power, the capacity, the speed, the brute ability to crunch data and understand patterns within it of artificial intelligence is on a exponential upward trend. And there's no reason to believe it's not going to continue. So what we're seeing in 2024 is probably just a little taste of what's coming in the coming decades. I'm seeing a comment in the chat. Let me just see. Is this something that's a substantive? Yes. Uh, I'm sorry. No, it's not. It's just a comment from Amy about how to view this. Sorry. Let me get right back to it. And so the next thing I want to talk about for a moment then is that there are all these places where artificial intelligence really is matching or exceeding human intelligence. The most important for our purposes is language production, communication, and translation, right? And so the idea that, for instance, Russians or North Koreans can set up troll farms, right? Places where they aim to influence the online communication of people in the United States or Britain or France or Germany or Japan, and that they don't even necessarily need to speak the language of the society they're trying to influence. They can let AI generate the translation or the communication. This is just going to get more and more powerful. And whether it's scientific problem solving, military applications, internet and commercial uses, medical uses, right? There's all of these breakthroughs. And please don't get me wrong. I do think that artificial intelligence may be tremendously beneficial to humankind, may help us cure diseases, will almost certainly assist in the effort to combat climate change. These are extremely powerful technologies that we will benefit from. But please also note that exactly because they're so powerful, they're also dangerous. And one of the places I think they're most dangerous is in their political application. So, just to give you a little bit more of a sense of what's going on with these AI breakthroughs, this again is review, but the idea that this deep neural network technology works by essentially looking at the human brain and seeing, right, what we have in the human brain is billions of neurons, trillions of neural connections, and complex networks that are layered. And so human visual perception doesn't occur in one neural network. It occurs in a series of neural networks that pass along information to each other, and then emerging from the network eventually is a perception. That's the number 8 to take this example, right? And part of why computers had such a hard time detecting human handwriting is because human handwriting is so uneven and all over the place, right? And this is what this diagram asks us to see all the different ways that human beings write the number eight. And please note, our brains are such that we look at all of those numbers, especially in that context, right, where it's obvious that they're in a sequence from 0 to 9. Of course, they're all eights. But if you ask the computer to look at one of these, what it's going to do is look at a pixelated image that looks like this, right? It's got 64 by 64 squares, and some of them are lighter and some of them are darker. How does it turn that into a number? And the old approach to neural networking was to try to get each of these squares weighted. How dark is it? And which ones are dark, which ones aren't dark, and get that into some kind of function that outputted a number. And the big breakthrough in 2012 was saying, wait a sec, let's put a couple layers together so that the first layer just detects the edges of this shape. And the second layer then detects how dark or light different regions are. And in so doing, we get a much more accurate form of computer handwriting recognition, right? So this is one thing to look at. Here's another aspect of this. How do you get a computer machine to learn to tell cats from dogs? Well, you start with a whole bunch of images of cats, dogs, and other things, and you assign them a label. A cat is a +1, a dog is a -1, everything else is a 0. And then you start devising these complex networks and assigning values to each of the units within the networks. These are essentially artificial neurons, and then you expose it to the images. How does it do? Well, at first, not very well. So you adjust some of these weights. You try to trace back, where does the mistake seem to be coming from? And then you run it again. It gets a little bit better. And you then adjust again, run it again. You're changing the shape of the network and the weights of the variables in the units. And lo and behold, you get to a place where it actually works perfectly. And by the way, this is not because we've told it that dogs have floppy ears and cats have pointy ears and dogs have snouts and tend to keep their tongues out of their mouths and cats have small mouths and generally keep their tongues in their mouths. No, this is just assigning weights to units that eventually allows the computer to figure out what is a dog and what is a cat. This then is built on, in part, these tremendous advances in computational power that have occurred over the last 50 plus years. And I hope you may be able to see the scale on this side of the diagram. This is Moore's law, so called, right? Integrated circuit chips on transistors. In 1970, the most powerful transistor had around 2,500 circuits on it, right? Um, and today it has over 50 billion, right? So exponential growth in what an individual circuit can do, and hence what computers can do. At the same time, more and more energy and money has been poured into artificial intelligence. And finally, the amount of data available for artificial intelligence to be trained on has vastly increased as human beings have started using the World Wide Web. Where do all those images of dogs and cats come from? Well, it turns out that billions of people like posting pictures of their dogs and cats onto the World Wide Web. And so the amount of data being generated annually on the World Wide Web has also gone up exponentially. And that allows these machines that are trying to learn how to talk, how to see, how to read, to scrape more and more data, gather it in, and work with it, right? That's how they're learning. And so we've talked about this a little bit before. This is a model of how the large language models work, right? They create maps of what are sometimes called word vectors or semantic and syntactic geography. What words go with what words, right? So cherry goes with fig, apricot, and peach. Cranberry goes with grape, blueberry, strawberry, and raspberry, right? By the way, eagle goes with deer and camel, and elephant goes pretty close to dog, bird, and cat, right? Chimpanzee, cheetah, dolphin go together. And when I say go together, what that means is having read billions of online texts. And please note, right, Harvard University, Oxford University, sorry, a whole bunch of university libraries have digitized large portions of the text that their archives contain, but there's also Facebook, there's also all of the stuff that's out there on Twitter, etc. And that also allows for now we can get more and more complicated, right? What words go together? How do we sort the human language out into nouns and verbs, adjective, adverbs, pronouns, and eventually the computer, the machine learns the syntax, learns the semantics, and can start generating language based on using these maps of meaning. All right, so that's the technological background. I want to spend a few minutes now. Again, somebody we've talked about together before. This is Shoshana Zuboff. It's been a couple years actually since we've talked about her work. And in particular, I want to talk about the age of surveillance capitalism, because this is going to help us to see how technology has been used in the 21st century and how we should anticipate this new artificial intelligence technology might be used going forward. So Shoshana Zuboff was a professor. She's now retired at Harvard Business School for a very long time. She was one of their main experts in machine intelligence and looked at it both in terms of its business and economic potential, but also from a more humanistic perspective. And her highly influential most recent book from a few years ago now, The Age of Surveillance Capitalism, The Fight for a Human Future at the New Frontier of Power, is primarily a history of Google and Google's business model. And so I want to start there and then move on a little bit from there. But to do that, I need to suggest some of the central concepts here. And so, beginning with the term that gives the book its title, surveillance capitalism, Zuboff suggests that in the 21st century, um, two variables, data and attention. Data about us. What kinds of stories do I read? What kinds of videos do I watch? How does that correlate with the amount of time I spend online, but especially with my purchasing habits? So that's data about me. That collecting that data about me is extremely valuable, it turns out, and that therefore the technology companies that profit from this are going to do their best to surveil me in order to collect this data about me. You probably have seen, right, when you sign up for a new website, when you just go visit it online, very often you have to click a box saying that you consent to the privacy terms, or you want to set them according to your preferences. Most people don't set them according to their preferences, but if you go in and you look at the details, it will tell you that the website is using cookies, and some of them are for performance, and some of them are for improving user experience, and some of them are for commercial reasons. A cookie, very nice word for essentially implanting in your computer a surveillance device, right? And so basically, every time we surf the web, we're leaving a data trail. We are being surveilled by multiple different websites and commercial enterprises that are trying to gather as much data about us as possible. That's the first key concept here of surveillance capitalism. It is making profit by extracting information about the people using the technology, um, extracting information about human behavior in order to be able to predict and control it. And this is um, compounded by another aspect of this, which is that the way in which you can gather maximum data is by having people pay attention for the most time to your particular website, your platform, your social media program. And so the other major source of value here is attention. And so different people express this different ways. Data is the new oil. Attention is the new oil. If oil was the most important commodity of the 20th century, both for sale, but also in terms of what it allowed us to do, it's used by the infrastructure that manufactures and transports almost every other commodity, right? The central commodity of the new economy, it's data and attention, right? And so this leads to an extraction imperative. Get as much data as possible, a dispossession cycle in which we surrender as much of our privacy as we can be induced to surrender. What this generates is prediction products. And let me be concrete, right? We've got Father's Day coming up in a week. Um, what is it that people are going to buy for Father's Day, right? And so, in particular, how can I market to you, given your particular online data profile, to uh, get as much money out of you, to make the most effective sale, to get you to buy my product and not somebody else's product. And what Google and others are manufacturing, the reason why Google is one of the most valuable corporations in the world, despite the fact that it gives its main product away for free. You never pay to Google anything, right? Um, is because it's selling to advertisers very effective, very accurate predictions about how to target you to get you to buy the slippers for your grandson for Father's Day. Right. This then leads to a behavioral futures market. The idea being that the prediction will be sold to the slippers company for a certain amount of money. But if the prediction turns out to be right, advertise these slippers to this person at this time and you'll get a sale, then they get further income, Google, etc. Right. And so this then suggests to Zuboff that this is a means of behavioral modification that has become incredibly powerful. So she notes all of this in the context of a history of Google, and this is a history in which Google becomes enormously successful in the first decade of the present century, but its success doesn't yet turn into a great deal of profit. Everybody is using Google, but Google hasn't figured out the way to um, translate that ubiquitous reliance on its technology into profit. Should it put advertisements on Google? It doesn't like that idea. And then it discovers that it has surplus data and that this might be a profitable asset. And this then leads it into this uncharted territory of beginning to develop behavioral prediction products, selling them, and it turns out they're hugely profitable for Google and for those who buy them. And the fact that there's an age in which there's skepticism about regulation, this coincides with the war on terror, and the government is eager to get as much of this data as possible, means Google is able to do all of this without much regulation. Um, I'm running short on time. I'm going to be very fast about this. This is the original model that Google uses, right? And so here's the user who is using the Google search engine. The Google search engine gives them a result, and the user does something with that result, follows that link. The link is a good link. No, goes back and does another search. It wasn't a good link. And so Google is monitoring that behavior, analyzing that behavior, improving its search engine. By the way, using artificial intelligence to do all of this, but there's a whole bunch of data that it could be collecting that it isn't. So Zuboff rather cleverly calls this data exhaust. And then beginning around a decade ago, Google begins to figure out, wait a sec, don't let that behavioral exhaust go. Keep it and use it. And here very quickly, right, the idea is that is the additional information that Google collects is analyzed and used to produce these new prediction products, and that turns into gold for Google. I'm gonna stop here, but I want to be as clear as possible about why we've got the long digression on Google's business model. And that is because it is a business model that involves collecting information about all of us in order to determine how to most effectively manipulate us. And this is being used by Google primarily for commercial purposes. It's selling this to Macy's and Walmart and Kmart, etc. And they're using it to market stuff online to us. But remember Cambridge Analytica in 2016? I'll just refresh your memory very quickly. Cambridge Analytica is the company that took data from Facebook and tried to do this politically. Let's figure out how to target political advertisements on Facebook in the same way that Google was helping Macy's to sell slippers on Father's Day. And by the way, Cambridge Analytica was only supposed to be doing research, but in the end, it sold its targeted advertising products to the Trump campaign. Steve Bannon actually instrumental in getting Cambridge Analytica connected to the Trump campaign. And we will probably never know how effective Cambridge Analytica was in getting voters to actually vote for Trump by giving them highly targeted online advertisements. But I think one thing we can be confident of, even if Cambridge Analytica wasn't very effective, that this is the wave of the future. and that more and more political campaigns are going to be purchasing more and more targeted behavioral prediction information from these various data collection surveillance companies, using it via AI to generate targeted advertisements to manipulate people into voting for their candidates. And I think it's well past time to begin reflecting on the implications of this for democracy. So that's where we're going, kind of laying the groundwork for you today. John, I see you've got your hand up. Go ahead.
Actually, David, just to compliment you, that's the clearest exposition of this really complicated stuff I've ever seen, the diagrams and everything, but also your explanation. It was really extremely interesting, so thanks.
Thank you, John. I do appreciate it. My diagrams are completely stolen from Shoshana Zuboff, but I'm glad you like them. And yeah, I've been thinking about this stuff for a while, and I've been trying to figure out for myself how to make sense of it all. I appreciate you saying it's starting to come into focus, because it's not easy. There's an awful lot going on simultaneously in this domain. Thank you, John.
Stealing is the great accomplishment of good scholarship.
Yes, absolutely. You don't borrow, steal. Thank you, John. Anybody else with a thought or a comment? Is this stuff making sense? I hope. Flossie, go ahead. Got to unmute yourself, Flossie.
I watch the commercials, the sale of things like underwear, um, the products that have to do with AIDS. And I noticed that the commercials change if perhaps they have gone too far in the direction of actually making the product interesting sexually. I noticed that for uh, the medicine for AIDS, that they no longer show two men kissing. They wipe that out. When it comes to underwear, they're very careful not to show men's underwear as much as they show women's. And they're being very careful not to show the face of the woman who's wearing the underwear. So little things like that are very subtle and very funny. And I've had a lot of good laughs. So thank you, Mike.
Flossie, can I ask, where are you watching these advertisements? Is it on television? I think you're muted again. I'm going to guess, Flossie, that you're talking about TV ads, and in a sense, that's the old media environment, and it's being modified by a lot of this. But please note that where these new tools are being used is primarily online advertisement, and I'll just say a little bit about this. We'll get into the details next week, but
Okay.
go ahead, Flossie.
No, you have the floor.
So the uh, difference between a television advertisement and a Facebook advertisement, a television advertisement, you can't reach Flossie without reaching a million other people, right? And so if some of those people are squeamish about seeing two men kiss, then the advertiser is not going to show two men kissing anymore. But if it's a targeted Facebook advertisement and they say Flossie doesn't care, that actually probably entices her, then you're going to see the commercial with two men kissing. But if you know Amy doesn't like that kind of stuff, she won't see that advertisement. She'll see an advertisement in which they just hold hands, right? And so the point is that this is what I'm going to call the privatization of political communication next week, right? Because it used to be a candidate couldn't talk to you unless they're showing up at your door without talking to millions of other people. And so they had to broadcast, talk to a lot of people. Now it's getting narrower and narrower. And just to take the 2016 example, if I, based on Cambridge Analytica's research, conclude that you're the kind of person who doesn't like immigrants, you consider them to be a threat to the country, I can send an ad to you that says vote for Trump and he will stop the immigrants. But if I conclude, actually, maybe you're not that kind of person, I can send a different ad with a different tone, a different content to you. And frankly, nobody needs to see the first advertisement who isn't already identified as being strongly anti-immigrant. David, go ahead. David, go ahead.
Am I'm on. Right. A couple of thoughts. First of all, I think that what's happened is Flossie is suffering from the faceless Fanny effect in the ads she gets. But secondly, I wanted to, as I was listening to you talk about and using the word the privatization of feedback and information, it occurs to me that this is an example where we've emphasized the capacity for great evil, but I was thinking this in terms of application to education. And if we could build the right set of diagnostic tools for kids in terms of their progress in reading or math or things like that, we could truly make the wishful thought of individualization of instruction and curriculum come to life here. So working on the virtuous side of this equation, I think there's lots of possibility. And the final thing I wanted to say is that I wanted to second what John said about the clarity of your presentation. And I wanted to remind us all of the old joke about what's the difference between research and plagiarism? And the answer is footnotes, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and I did give credit, I hope.
Oh, of course. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And so coming back to the educational application of this technology, I think the jury is still out on this, right? I mean, and so obviously we get together and talk on Zoom every week, right? And we enjoy that. But if you're talking about a 10-year-old, a 12-year-old, an 8-year-old, how well do they do with a computer environment as opposed to an in-person environment? By the way,
Well,
David,
I wasn't thinking that necessarily that curriculum or pedagogy would be delivered individually. I was thinking that we would have the individualization of our diagnostic tools so we could determine what was most appropriate for David Paris. And that might very well be putting you with a group of other people so you can solve problems together. The individualization of the diagnostic side of things doesn't necessarily dictate the individualization of the delivery of whatever instructional regime or curriculum materials I might have. Yeah.
excellent.
But the problem right now is that our diagnostic tools aren't up to the task. And we have a lot of work to do on that side of the equation.
Thank you for clarifying the comment, David. And I'm just going to point out two things really quickly. The first is, in a sense, what you're describing is, in a sense, what really good teachers do, right? Which is to say that they recognize where they need to meet the student, right? And that's based on a judgment of what the student's needs, interests, passions,
Sure.
are, and they individualize the education if they find themselves in a context that allows them to do that, right? A certain structure is necessary for them to be able to do that. But the second thing then is that they often do that based on a hunch or a judgment. Very often they can't even tell you exactly why they decided to take this approach with this kid. And one advantage that the artificial intelligence has is it can simultaneously compare millions or billions of data sets or points of information. And for instance, with medical diagnostics, this turns out to be very powerful. So maybe this will also be very powerful with educational diagnostics in coming up with the precise profile for what David Parrots needs to be able to learn this thing that he's been struggling with. Ruth, you've had your hand up for a while. Go right ahead.
This may not be closely connected, but we had a program from the Lighthouse for the Blind this week, and they were demonstrating and telling us about this app called Seeing AI. And it's you download the app on your phone, and then when you walk along the street, it tells you what stores you're passing. when you go in the supermarket, it tells you what's on the box. If you're going to look for your dollars, it tells you what that dollar is. And it seems like there may be really good applications for older people with this kind of technology.
And to be as clear as possible, there's new applications that actually seem to have some promise for restoring something akin to sight for the blind, or mobility for people who suffered strokes or spinal injuries. I want to be
Hearing too.
pardon? Hearing too. Yes, I didn't hear you. Yeah, the potentials of this technology really are tremendously beneficial. The question is, can we regulate its use in such a way that we take advantage of the beneficial applications and avoid the dangers? And of course, the problem is that we're not very good at regulating anything these days. And this technology moves so fast, it's going to be hard to keep up in terms of regulations unless we get much better at doing that. So Elizabeth, I see your hand up again. Is that on purpose?
It's on purpose this time.
Go ahead, please. Sorry, I ignored you for a second because it went up accidentally last time. Go ahead.
Company has pretty well figured out that I'm a very liberal old lady in California, and I get, you know, like more than 100 emails each day asking for money. This morning I was startled by an email saying, "Are you a Trump supporter? Click here." They're really scraping the bottom of the barrel.
And so, Elizabeth, I'm going to point out to you that in 2012, Barack Obama's campaign, which in some ways we get to thank and blame Barack Obama for some of this, because he was really in 2012 at the very cutting edge of using this new technology for especially fundraising appeals, as you're talking about. And Obama actually ran an experiment. Let's ask for money once a week. Is that too often? And it turned out it wasn't, that he made more money when he asked for money once a week. Okay, let's ask for money every 4 days. Is that too often? Is that going to put people off? Turns out it wasn't too often. To put a long story short, his campaign never got to the point where it was too frequent to ask that it actually proved to be counterproductive. They got to the point where they were asking for money every day, and they were making more money than when they asked once a month, once a week, every 4 days. And they were surprised that they weren't putting people off through their frequent solicitations. So yes, it appears that if you hit the right person, the liberal person from Northern California, with a solicitation every day, or 100 a day, I guess, it bears fruit. Barbara, go ahead. You're still muted though, Barbara. Did you I assume you meant to raise your hand?
No, I didn't. An accident like Betsy.
Okay. Well,
Thank you.
well, nice to hear your voice, Barbara. I think
Same.
should call it a day. We've gone 15 minutes over. I've got to go on an excursion. I know you guys got to go to lunch. Wonderful as always being with you. Thank you for the kind feedback. I really do appreciate it. And to be continued next week, unless something really urgent comes up. Take care, everybody. Be well, and see everybody next week. Thank you.
Can't catch that data point at the moment.